Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Welcome everyone to another episode of All Things Policy. I am Astha, Program Manager for Defense and Foreign Affairs at Takshila, and I'm joined by Arindam Goswami, who is Staff Research Analyst with High Tech Geopolitics Program. In this episode of All Things Policy, we look at a key question, which is, as in India, AI pushes its way in agriculture. Does it have the data and governance systems needed to support it? And can AgriStack provide that foundation? AgriStack basically is built as a digital public infrastructure which links farmer identity, land, and crop data to improve access to various services. We can think of credit, insurance, market, and many advisory services which are required in agriculture space. And it also has a potential to make agriculture more data driven and efficient. But if you think about it, it also raises important questions like who owns this data? Can farmers meaningfully consent to the use of their data? And what kind of oversight is needed as AI systems begin to rely on it? So basically, I'll just set a context, Arindam, for AgriStack, which is it's like as I mentioned, it's a digital public infrastructure, and it is built to create an ecosystem which has different kind of services which a farmer can avail. So at its core, AgriStack links farmer identity, land, and crop data. It's just not digitization, but it's also like a structural shift that will come in agriculture. So I want to ask you, what would it mean to have these data sets actually put together? What could it mean?
Yeah, so if you were to look at AgriStack, we could compare it with what we have in India in terms of the digital public infrastructure. And when it comes to DPIs, we instantly think of India Stack, right?
Yeah.
So India has been running one of the largest and one of the most successful and ambitious digital public infrastructures in the world. It started with things like Aadhaar, and then we built on top of it the unified payments interface.
Yes.
And the way India Stack is structured is that it has layers. That's why it's called a stack. It's a stack of technologies, it's a stack of platforms which are supposed to provide different functionalities, and you build further services in different sectors on top of this platform, right? So if you could have a national digital health mission, you could have a AgriStack, you could have a payments infrastructure. When it comes to AgriStack, I guess the main rationale behind building something like this is provision of various types of services to the farmer, which at the moment seems to be quite disconnected from all these benefits, right? If you look at the problems that a farmer faces, right from insecure land titles, proper dissemination of information regarding what sort of crops to be sown, what sort of fertilizers, etc., to acquire, to use, right to fintech services, to getting loans, etc., right? So all of this is contingent upon different platforms providing different services being made available at one interface, which is what we call the AgriStack, which will be a sort of a platform, and then provision of services on top of this. Now, as you mentioned, it has various components and various things to consider, but like privacy, security, consent, as agriculture is a state subject, there has to be a federated
architecture for it.
So all of that matters. We can come to it one by one.
So like you said, federated architecture, which means a different kind of imagination it would require, because each state will have its own way of implementing how they want to implement AgriStack, because then we'll also have to think of where does majority of data would lie, which is the consent manager. Right. So, for example, if there's a state, say it's Uttar Pradesh or say it's Madhya Pradesh, so state government will itself decide what kind of data they want to collect and where that data would finally, stay, because central government can only give an overarching architecture for it, but at the minute level, it's the state that is going to take a call on how it has to be designed and how their consent manager would look like.
And I think in case of agriculture, it is very important to have a federated, decentralized sort
Yes.
of a system, because agriculture by itself is not something very homogeneous, right? It's pretty heterogeneous in terms of the differences that you'll have in cropping patterns, etc., at the local level, right?
Yeah.
If you look at fintech, or the reason UPI succeeds as a top-down approach, is because at the transaction level this is quite standardized, right? I mean, you want to pay, you have a limited number of payment instruments that you have to configure. All of those have also been standardized. I mean, you have standardized protocols of accessing net banking, of accessing credit card transactions, so that it's easier to standardize and build a platform that is top down. But in case of agriculture, you can't really have center forcing decisions at a very minute level. Yes, it can, with the consent of states, and in a very cooperative manner, decide what sort of standards to follow, what sort of API interfaces to allow, what sort of privacy standards to follow, what sort of consent frameworks to follow. But it's better that the actual implementation or the customizations happen at the state level. Although that itself has its problems, unless the data interchange mechanisms and consent mechanisms are in a way standardized.
Yeah. So what also AgriStack has planned to do is to have a farmer registry, a number which is equivalent to Aadhaar, but it's not Aadhaar. Land-owning farmers will have. So when I say they will have a farmer registry, there is also one question that we land ourselves up to, which is we are not considering tenant farmers in this. So, which is majority of the farmers in India. Land-owning farmers are not the ones actually, who are there in the agriculture. So we are only right now focusing on land-owning farmers, and AgriStack is only going to bring together data for land-owning farmers. This is a very it's a thing which is designed in the architecture itself. So then I move on to this question, which is, once we have this kind of infrastructure in place, what kind of technology, especially say, I know AI seems to be a little far-fetched even before we get to making this ecosystem, but what are the implications you see in terms of tech and AI in agriculture?
Right. As you mentioned, there are various problems, right? I mean, if you include even AI into this mix, there are the problems explode to a larger extent. But even without that, we have problems of exclusion. We have problems of, say, bias. For example, when you rightly talked about exclusion of tenants and sharecroppers. So apparently there's this example from Telangana's Dharani project, I think, where it digitized and updated its land records, but obviously it didn't account for the tenants. And then you can just imagine any beneficiary sort of program built on top of this will obviously exclude people who are not in this system, right? So now if you add AI on top of this, it actually works on data that's in the system, right?
Yes.
And if you're systematically, maybe unintentionally, but not totally unknowingly, you are excluding a large section of the farmer population, right? I mean, as per some records, according to the National Sample Survey, approximately 60% of agricultural land households in India are either landless laborers, or they cultivate someone else's lands as tenants or sharecroppers. So if the data itself is not going to have this substantial chunk of the population as part of the data, then you can imagine what sort of insights would come out of this data, right? Similarly, there could be, I mean, AI is prone to bias being magnified if you don't really correct that the noise in the data.
Right.
And the other problem is, do we have models that are actually trained on data that we'll have in these systems, right? A lot of our land records still are not standardized, are not legible properly, even though we have the land records modernization program.
Record of rights is being now digitized.
Right. But we still haven't, firstly, done it completely. It's a long way off. And a lot of this also depends on the data entry operations that we do, right? Mistakes that crop up in that will also then get magnified if we have AI based prediction systems or AI based services built on top of this. So yeah, that's always there. We can obviously build checks and balances in this. I mean, the general thing that's recommended is that if there's some exclusion, then there has to be grievance redressal mechanisms. But if these grievance redressal mechanisms are going to be again helmed by the same bureaucracy, then it's not a guarantee, not going to be a pro farmer sort of a system, right? So this error rectification system has to be built along with the system that's being built, and not as an afterthought, not something that we build later on.
Yeah. So I think data collection is one of the major hiccups in AgriStack, because like you mentioned, a lot of record of rights itself is not digitized. That's the first step. And when the data is digitized, it has to be in the right format for it to be then converted and used in the architecture that the government is trying to build for agriculture. So that itself, because it runs into millions and millions of figure, it may probably take time. And also to eliminate the noise and the possibility of error, and eliminating by design should be, we should try not to have in the system, right? Like, because like you said, there are biases, there are people, like there are farmers which can get eliminated because there is some eligibility or we have put in some condition and they get removed from the system itself.
We have seen that in the PDS systems where once we linked it with Aadhaar, the mismatches in names or biometric failures, etc., caused people to be. So there was maybe a 3 to 5% actual fraud, or like fraud that you wanted to prevent, but in doing so, you actually harmed around 30 to 35% of people who got excluded for no fault of theirs.
So even with land records, what happens, Arindam, is basically there are multiple owners, right? Through generation, the division of land will happen, but it probably will not reflect at the ROR. So when you go for all these verification through Aadhaar, you will see, there are like different owners of the same land, and the division is still not reflecting in the ROR records. ROR, I mean, records itself. So it still doesn't reflect in those documents, and that's, it's in itself is a long process to do. And then by the time they get it done, the whole system of putting data together has moved on. So that itself is a problem at the ground level. Now when I think of we are digitizing this, so I'm again re-emphasizing, do we have the tech capability to host that kind of data? Not just at the state level. Obviously, if we are thinking of an architecture, state will have to increase the capability. But do we have capabilities in terms of, if we can host this kind of data at central and at state? And if we do have, or if we don't have, how much time will it take for us if we want to think of it?
Yeah, I am honestly, maybe not yet. We don't have probably yet the technological and data readiness, but as it's said, right, it's probably more than what the skeptics suggest and less than what enthusiasts actually claim, right? So I mean, on the positive side, if you were to look at it, we have the DPI systems that we have built. They have improved radically. UPI has more than 10 billion transactions a month. We have BharatNet connecting.
Even National Digital Health Mission, which you mentioned in the beginning, is doing pretty good. I know health is a central subject, central to government.
Maybe that helps. But in this case, since it's federated, there are other challenges maybe. But on the positive side, we have BharatNet. The smartphone penetration is also increasing, although the smartphone literacy as such is still maybe not a lot. Although the penetration of smartphones has increased. We have the Jan Dhan Yojana, so we have the bank accounts. So on the land records also, we have the digitization program. We have something called the Bhu Aadhaar, where you actually have a unique land parcel identification number, etc., etc. Right? So those are there, but obviously there are patches. Connectivity is still patchy in areas like the tribal areas, the remote hilly areas, etc., right, where also you probably want to have this, right? Data quality itself might be affected by how it is entered at the data entry operator level, right? Then, as in the case of all Indian government services in India, whether that particular organizational capacity exists at the agricultural departmental level is something that we have to assess. Probably that's something where a lot of training, supervision, etc. would be required. But I guess that can be done. The thing is, you need a lot of political will to focus on this.
So coming to political will, Arindam, so I have done some of this work. So what I have seen is that some states are very, very receptive to train their field officers to collect the right data. And in this, like, record of rights plays the major role, and people who are collecting it. So if you're verifying from a physical copy to digital, converting it to a digital copy, then it makes sense. And for that, you have to train the government officials who are going on the field, because they already have a rapport. You don't have to build another workforce to do this thing. The existing workforce should be trained. They should go and collect it. That's how if the state was receptive enough to adapt to it, they were showing that interest, and the capacity building was being done for these people. But again, the thing is, the record of rights in physical form itself is incorrect at a lot of places. So rectification of that has a very longer gestation period. That becomes a hindrance in then reflecting it to the digital form.
Right. I guess the benefits are there for us to visualize at least, but the path there is difficult. But I mean, if you were to look at some international examples also, right? We have seen something similar to the UPI being started in Kenya with their M-Pesa thing. Then we had some systems that Kenya used for SMS-based notifications for dairy markets, dairy farmers, etc. Right? We also had some example in Tanzania, which was implementing e-government agricultural services, but that failed because it was more of a top-down driven thing. But some learnings from these implementations worldwide is that firstly, especially in a developing country like India, where literacy, financial strength, etc., at the local, rural levels, etc., is not that high, you probably require systems that are not that technology heavy. You require maybe minimal technology on the farmer's end, right? You can have a system which stores it to be very technologically savvy, but at the farmer's end, it has to be something which is not very technologically heavy. It should solve an immediately felt problem, right? I mean, for example, a farmer needs to know that he probably accesses a portal or he sends an SMS and he gets, say, a weather advisory. Instead of telling him that you input all your data into this abstract system that we are building, and then once you log in, we'll build systems on top of it. Systems have not yet been built. He doesn't have visibility into what sort of systems will be built on top of that, whether the banks who have access to all his data. Now, in this case, if you see, the visibility of the data is getting spread, right? I mean, the banks would have the data. The farmer also obviously had the data earlier. Now the banks would have it. The commodity traders would have it. What is the guarantee that he's not manipulated because of this data, right? So that sort of visibility he needs to be provided. And you don't want the farmer to just trust an abstract system.
But Arindam, I'll give you a pushback on this. And the pushback is that we all have PAN numbers. We enter our PAN number in so many places. We don't have visibility of where this data would be used. So all I'm saying is that, sure, we can build a complex system where there are, like, gatekeeping we are doing in terms of how much data a bank should be able to access and how much should a crop advisory. So, like, if I'm a crop advisory consultant company, then I should be able to access only crop related data and not the financial thing, and vice versa. But bank will be able to access all of this. So what I'm saying is, farmer should be understanding enough that the access they are giving is enough for them to get an advisory or get a financial help.
I think in this sense, some things that we have, at least on paper, started doing right is our India stack is built on the principle that privacy is by design, privacy in the code itself, right? So the standards and protocols that we espouse is privacy and security in code by design, right? We also have the data empowerment and protection architecture, which was a framework developed by Niti Aayog, and the data framework actually depends on five, six principles. One, I mean, the acronym for that stands for organs, right? So O stands for open standards. That is, it should be a service architecture that's open in the sense that anybody can access, has visibility into what sort of services or interfaces are being provided. The consent granted or the permissions granted by the individual, in this case the farmer, should be revocable. It should be granular. You don't take broad based consents. You take very granular for a particular purpose, which sort of you just touched upon it, right? That if a farmer wants just crop advisory services, he should be able to give granular access to only that sort of
data,
service using his data.
Yes.
If he doesn't want loans, he should be able to say, no, I don't want to share this with banks, right? And all of this should be auditable. So A stands for auditable. It should be auditable in machine readable logs, not just any sort of logs, but things that can be analyzed later on.
Right.
Then it should have, it's based on the principle of notices to all parties. So any data that is shared, any changes that are made should be notifiable to all parties. And then obviously it should be secure by design. Now, there's also the other principles that are related to data privacy. Say, for example, in GDPR, right, you have that consent, you are opted out by default, which has not yet percolated to India.
In India yet.
So that sort of detail we require here. You should be able to delete your data. You should be able to...
Right to be deleted, right to be forgotten,
etc. Right? So I guess the DPDA Act that we have, Digital Data Protection Act that we have, its rules are still being firmed up to some extent, but I hope we have all these principles enshrined in that.
So while we are at it for the privacy, I want to understand there's also this concern that we are building advanced system on weak data foundation. And how big is the risk that we are looking at? Because when we think of farmer, we are like, okay, there's just data, like it's just land, it's just farmer, what they're growing. But we don't think of like if there are large land owning farmers, the risk could be higher, right? Like even in the design of AgriStack, central government will not have access to a lot of data. But if there are large farmers in a small village, they can be recognized, right? So what are the risks that we are looking at?
Yeah, I mean, apart from the risks that we just talked about in terms of data privacy, consent, etc., there's always the other political risk of surveillance and all that could crop in here. Surveillance of landowning farmers, what sort of banking transactions they have done, if the loans and all that you're taking are so easily visible to all actors, and there have to be rules to prevent the malicious use of this data to act against that actor. So those sorts of checks and balances have to be there. I mean, as usual in India, we are behind the developed world when it comes to enforcing these rules. We don't have the awareness about these rules also. I mean, even in urban centers, we are very free in giving away our Aadhaar. We don't think twice before giving our mobile numbers, etc. Right? So expecting that out of farmers without awareness campaigns, etc., is going to be difficult. That's why the rules have to do this for them, right? I mean, they should be able to enforce these things on their own, which will be difficult. So that's why we have the CSC, the kiosks that they have proposed, right, where the farmers won't have to interact with the system. They would go to a service center and then the person there would do it. But again, that brings another middleman, and then the chances of him firstly entering wrong data or taking money to do it and seeking all those sorts of problems. So these are problems that are inherent in India for all sorts of systems. I'm sure AgriStack is also susceptible to these problems.
Definitely. Like I've been in rural areas and I've seen even for basic schemes that government are giving, like Pradhan Mantri Kisan Nidhi Yojana is there. For that also they have to go and go with their Aadhaar and like their record of rights and get them verified, and then they will get the benefit. And this is again only limited to the landowning farmers. So I mean, I understand, to sum it all up, like AgriStack is a good step forward in terms of tech in agriculture ecosystem, but I also see a risk in terms of who owns the data and who is benefiting from it and who is giving access to that data. I know farmers will have most of the control, but they also don't have the knowledge to control that data.
So, also, there's this other idea of farmers letting go of a lot of their data, but the benefits that they might get out of that data might be much less than the benefits that other service providers might get out of it, right? I mean, commodity traders, banks, etc. So in that sense, if there could be some sort of benefits could be designed in a way that farmers or farmer producer committees, etc., could be part of the system to provide more heft to farmers. Maybe those sorts of designs also have to be thought of especially in India's case, where we don't have a lot of diffuse power in the hands of the farmers.
Yeah. So when you mentioned just now about with this data, can there actually, I mean, this is like a skeptical thought that I just having conversation with you, is that when we have all this data and there are consulting companies in agriculture ecosystem, not just the banking, but other kind of services that we have in agriculture, would they be to an extent be able to exploit like what is sown and what becomes a cash crop? Like, can they define the whole agriculture? I'm not saying entirely, but in some ways can they come in and
Yeah, I mean, having this data is this data is actually a sort of a wealth in the hands of these providers,
yeah,
right? I mean,
yeah,
say commodity traders. If you know, if commodity traders know what sort of crops are actually being grown, what sort of quantity, what sort of land holdings are available, they can surely influence, maybe through the loans that are provided, etc. The banks also could probably use this data to sell some of their products, right? You can have all those problems, but because of these problems, if you don't build such a system, then that would be akin to throwing the baby out with the
that's true.
bathwater, right? Because
Yeah.
this system solves, at least in theory, it solves a lot of the farmers' problems also. We need to build it properly, but if you build it properly, you have something like the UPI, that
You
has shown
just, yeah,
benefits.
you just need to enter farmer
But obviously,
registry.
recognize that agriculture is a different ballgame than payments infrastructure.
Yeah.
But we have the thought process is correct in the sense that we have an authentication mechanism. We have a DigiLocker sort of system,
Yes.
which can verify things, we can store documents, etc. We have a payments infrastructure,
Yes.
and we have other sundry programs like the Bhu Aadhaar, all those sorts of things. India seems to have a lot of these systems, right? We have the Jan Samarth portal and all of that,
Yes.
where people can access financial products, etc. So I guess everybody's building things in silos. If it could be part of a larger coherent, although decentralized federated system, then that is a good goal to aspire for. But yeah, let's not throw away the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah. So with skepticism, we accept that AgriStack is a great project that government is trying to envision.
I mean, as we say in public policy, right? Any great idea that's not implemented properly is not a great idea, right? So the main point is how well it's implemented, and we have some systems, we have some precedences which can guide us in building these systems properly. But yeah,
so just one last question I have for you today, Arindam. So do you see that AgriStack in some ways will empower farmers or restructure agriculture system in a way that we still don't understand fully yet?
I mean, agriculture itself is such a complicated system, and I'm no expert on that. I'm majorly coming from the tech angle here and the public policy angle. So at first glance, it does seem like something that can empower farmers, but I'm not the correct person to make a judgment about this
agriculture
so far into the future. But at least the tech part has some promises, it has some loopholes, it can lead to exclusion bias, etc. It can centralize power in the hands of some service providers if not kept in check, but those are problems that you can solve. So let's hope it empowers farmers.
Yeah, thank you, Arindam, for great conversation that we had about AgriStack, and thank you everyone for joining in for another episode of All Things Policy. We'll see you in the next episode. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Astha.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.